record. Hi everyone, this is Ricky Spencer. Welcome to the Sociology of Media Voices series. And today we're going to speak with Pharell Sharma, who's going to take us on a journey about what it's like to live as a trans man, also to navigate his spaces in the world of sports, as well as his experiences with the education system that he has experienced and his views on that, and as well as how are trans men perceived in the media in general in Australia and what his experiences and where he is at the moment. So welcome, Pharrell.
Thanks for having me, Ricky. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you. So let's start, Pharrell. Let's just tell me a little bit about yourself. So how did your journey of affirmation begin?
Well, in terms of, the knowing part, I always, as I said per our last discussion, I knew at the age of 5 who I was. There's no question. I think a lot of the misconception a lot of people think is, did you decide? Did you choose? And it's not like that at all. It's you just know. And yeah, there was no if, and, or but. I just knew something was wrong. And obviously, throughout the years that I grew up, I did accumulate a lot of depression. Like it got to the point where it was so significant, it just accumulated on top of the the daily life that I had from bullying. So I had, I always like to think I had 3 compartments of my life. I dealt with the family part, I dealt with my own part, and then I dealt with the bullying side of things. So it was just all in one big genre of hell.
Mm. And most of us have school, which has been a negative experience with the complexity of trying to find our own identity and form friendship groups. Can you tell us a little bit about your experiences at school?
Primary school, my first school, primary school, I was badly bullied. Mainly from the kids because obviously I don't know, I wouldn't say different. I had shorter hair. I wanted to have shortest hair as I could. I never had a group that I could fit in with. Everyone used to call me, well, there was one particular girl, I'll never forget. I still see her around. She used to call me It.
Mm,
And she used to call me Michael Jackson because they didn't know, because he chopped off everything, so to speak. They said, you're the next Michael Jackson, chopping off everything else. So I was really
mm,
bullied from kids, but it was the teachers too. Actually, by year 2, my teacher actually placed me in the corner in front of her desk, so I wasn't allowed to socialize with the kids. That was a whole year on my own in front of her. So I was just basically excluded from socializing. I was excluded from having friends. I was just pushed aside, and as a young person, you don't know what's going on, and you start to believe everything that you hear. And then when I swapped schools, it was a little bit easier. Like I made a lot of friends there, but I got along with everyone, the boys, the girls, mixed groups. So I usually didn't have an issue socializing. I was bullied, but it wasn't that bad. Um, High school, I only had a couple years. And once again, it was mainly the teachers. I got along with everyone at school in terms of, I never had a set group. I never had, everyone sort of has a little mean girls groups. We got the nerds and the sporty kids. So I was really friends with everyone. I didn't like to stay in the one spot, maybe because I didn't know who I was in a sense. But it was the teachers that loved pointing out who I was in front of the students, which really put a lot of embarrassment on me.
mm,
And by that stage, I just didn't think I was depressed every day. There was not one day at school that I wasn't depressed throughout my years from primary to high school.
mm. And that depression, how did it manifest itself?
It got to the point where I wasn't sleeping. I was overthinking every single thing, and I started to hate myself. Self-loathing, no confidence. The depression then turned into self-harming, which then turned into suicide or attempted suicide.
Mm.
And it just went downhill for a long, long time.
And did you seek out supports during this time?
No, I didn't have any support. I didn't know what support was. I didn't understand anything, who to speak to. And I did have guidance counselors at school, but they kept pitting it back on me, saying there was something wrong with me. So, and coming from adults, it's like, well, you're not going to go reach out to another adult. And my father just really didn't make anything better. And I did speak to my mum, but having the home family problems, she didn't have much time for me, and not in a bad way. It was like, well, I have a sister who's disabled. I had a father who was gambling, stealing, cheating. So, my mum's last concern was me. Again, not in a bad way. Just like when you got all that stuff going on, it's
Mm.
hard to focus on everyone at the same time. So I spent my years alone, no support whatsoever.
And what sort of school was it? Was it a religious domination school or
No, no, no. What do you call it? Public school,
public school? Okay. And
mixed.
mixed, yep. So what about in terms of television or music? Did that at all help sort of take your focus of your bullying away or take you to another space?
Just give me 2 seconds.
Yes, yep. So I'll let you.
Writing and music. Music was really a big one for me. I loved listening to music, and that was when I could zone out.
Mm-hmm.
So when I had music on, it was always bringing up, which I'm sure a lot of people nowadays understand. You got a certain song, it brings up a certain emotion, or when you're feeling a certain emotion, you listen to angry music. So I was very, very big on my music. I loved it. There's not a moment where I'm not listening to music. So when I'm out, music's in my ears. When I'm home, music's in my ears. So I pretty much have it in the headphones in my ears nonstop. And writing was the biggest one. I was writing quite a lot. Like right now, if I wanted to, and I've done it before, I can write a book a month. Just general writing.
Mm-hmm.
It turns into lifestyle writing, creative writing, poetry. Obviously, back then it was more depressing due to the nature of my mindset, but it
Mm.
allowed me to get my thoughts out on a paper. But I also noticed that when I wrote, I found a lot out about myself because I was very theoretical, wanting to understand the philosophical side of life. So it allowed me to engage in other parts of my mindset that I wouldn't be able to in a school or workplace setting.
What about television? Were there any shows that you could relate to when you were growing up during those difficult times that you could say, "Oh, that's just like me," or any documentaries that had an aha moment?
No, actually, I didn't watch TV much. We didn't. I didn't have a TV, but I didn't actually watch anything. I don't remember any TV shows or anything that reminded me, was like, as you were just saying, nothing at all actually,
Mm.
which is a little bit sad in a way.
What about the internet? Did you do any searching or anything to look up to like keywords like transgender or trans
No,
man?
no, the only thing at the time, I didn't have access to the internet till I was about 14. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
have a computer. And by that stage, I wasn't looking at. I looked up a lot of men, like just men in general, to understand. All right, why don't I have that? I
Mm-hmm.
want to look like this. I want that male definition. But other than that, it wasn't very. No, didn't think of anything at the time that was those terminologies or those words. I didn't even know at the time what transgender meant or anything like that.
What about because you mentioned that your love of music, and I remember when I was growing up that I would look at certain people in because I used to always escape into my world of music, and when I grew up in the 80s, which was my sort of teenage years, I looked at people like Boy George, um, Eurythmics, and I grew up in that era when it was called the Romantics movement, which people were gender binding. There wasn't a name for gender non-binary, but men could wear makeup, but it was sort of so it gave me kind of permission to explore myself. Did any kind
Mm.
of musicians or anyone in the entertainment industry capture something that you thought, oh, I wish I could be like that, or I think I might try a bit of that?
No, the only influence I had was Pharrell Williams, and that was just because I wanted to be a music producer myself. And I just watched a lot of his, movie clips and as much as I could information I could find out about him. But no, really honestly, there was nothing that I really aspired to. It was just general. younger men and just looking at men. But
Hmm.
nothing like that at all, which is yeah, never thought about it, but no.
And now, going in through those years, Pharrell, you mentioned school was quite tough. At what stage did you find that school was too difficult to continue? And how, with our conversation, if you want to maybe explain to everybody
Yeah.
listening a little bit about what happened to you and when you left school.
Well, the age of 14, I was in year 8. I was towards the end of that year. My, what are they called? My guidance counselor, school coordinator, who ran our year level, pulled me aside. So originally, she actually, when she first met me, when I arrived at the school, year 7, I thought she took a liking to me. And then toward the end of year 8, she pulled me in the office and she's like, let's have a chat. Again, I could never understand what she was on about because I'm like, I still don't know why I'm here. Am I in trouble? And she basically pointed out abruptly that, you're more than happy to stay at the school, but I'm going to fail you this year. And if you continue to stay, I'm going to fail you every year after that until you decide to leave.
Mm,
Um, and then when she pulled my parents in, she told them a completely, Pharrell's not fitting in with the school. And it's like, you lied to me. Like, you've obviously forced me to leave school or else I was going to fail. Or at least, look, I don't know if that's how it works, but that was the story I was told. So I don't know if she has the right to fail me, but that's all I knew at the time. And then when she pulled my parents in for the meeting, she basically said, Pharrell's not coping. He's getting into bad, he's getting into fights, he's getting into arguments, he's bullying everyone else. And it's like, are you kidding me? And of course, my dad, being the obnoxious human he is, he actually listened to her and then told me off in front of her and goes, "Why would you do that?" And it's like, are you kidding me? So we're basically having an argument that my dad's taking the teacher's side, and my mum's like, "I don't understand what's going on." And the teacher then asks, "What schools are you looking at?" And my parents are going, "Oh, this school, that school, etc." So then when we left and decided to go into these other schools, no one wanted me in. They've gone, "No, we've heard about Pharrell. We can't accept him here." So basically, she had gone out behind our backs and contacted the schools, and I wasn't allowed anywhere. And the one school that I did go, which is small, not like a special school, like, kids that, don't like school, I was allowed to go to one of those. And that didn't last too long because the teachers kept, once again, not listening to me. I kept saying, "Could you refer to me as he?" This is when I finally spoke up
mm,
and said he, him, etc. And it was still new. And then the teacher just kept referring to me as she and smiling. And then all of a sudden they've said to my mum, "Look, Pharrell's not going to fit in here anymore. You have to take him." And it's like, I'm the most quietest, politest person there could be. And I did go to another school which was recommended, more government based, as in, like, council, recognized, again, for kids that, maybe get into trouble, which was the only school I could get into. And we had about 5 interviews and they wouldn't let me in. They just kept
mm,
saying, "Look, Pharrell's not going to fit in here." Mum's like, "We've got an interview that you keep putting us in the interview saying that we're going to go in." And then he finally turned around and goes, "No, Pharrell's going to cop a lot of homophobic responses, and I don't think it's best he stays here." That was the first time I stood up and said, "You know what, mate, you deserve a punch in the face for that." And I actually just went to him and I said it to his face, and then I just walked out and I slammed the door. And as I got
mm,
in the car, I thought my mum's going to kill me, and she goes, "I'm proud of you." I didn't hit him, um, but it just got to the point where I've got adults bullying me, and now it's coming from men, women. And so I just, after that, I just stayed at home from the age of, I think, maybe 14, 15 till 19. I didn't have a school and basically wasn't allowed back into any school. And no
mm,
other reason than because of who I am. I'm not a, I'd like to think I'm not a bad kid. I was very depressed, but that's about it.
mm. And that experience at school, did that sort of kind of create, um, kind of stop you from sort of thinking about wanting to do different things or career choices at all?
Well, of course it did, because I didn't understand anymore what life was about. I didn't understand what work was out there for me. I didn't even understand who I was in terms of what my direction is. I didn't have a father figure. I didn't have family. I had no one around me because of my dad's behavior, and treating the family, like, my mum's side of the family and his side of the family, so bad. No one wanted us around. I didn't have cousins. I didn't have friends. I had no one. And so to grow up in my room, not understanding what can I do for work? And I asked mum, can I get a job at, the pizza store? Can I get it? Because we had shops around,
mm,
and my
mm,
dad wouldn't let me work. He
mm,
wouldn't, he wouldn't grant me any, he just kept throwing me back in my room. I wasn't allowed to study. I wasn't allowed to work. Again, music production was the only thing that I loved. And I thought maybe I can get into this. And then I ended up buying all the Apple loops with the computer that I did have at the time. And that's when I wanted to be a music producer. That was the only thing that I could understand was available to me with what I knew. But other than that, no, I didn't understand opportunities, and I didn't understand anything prior to that.
mm. So tell us, how did you get into the fitness industry? What kind of led you to that pathway?
Well, at the age of 19, I ended up it was 18. I think it was 18, sorry. I walked into Video Easy and they had the UFC DVDs there.
Hmm.
And they had like the Ultimate Fighter, which is, like a small series where, the guys go in the house and they fight, and then they can get a contract with the UFC, or they had the UFC DVDs. And I ended up just getting as much as I could, and I loved watching it. I loved just the sport and what it had, and ended up looking up. There was a martial arts gym around the corner, which had karate, jiu-jitsu, what's that, MMA. And it ended up being one of those McDojo gyms, which means, for those who aren't familiar with that term, is the um, the actual head owner took the classes, but he was posing as a black belt and he was a white belt. So that's like the number one thing you don't do. But I didn't know. And because I fell in love with the sport, I started doing jiu-jitsu, I did karate, I did kickboxing, I did MMA, I did the group fitness classes. I just fell in love with training so much, and I had so much energy to burn. I was there about 3, 4 hours a night, 6 days a week. And that just took my mind off everything that I had, because all I had now was sports and all these different sports that I could just constantly keep doing.
And what's it like? Like you mentioned that at one stage you really got into the idea of competitive boxing. What does that feel like for you, Pharrell, going into a boxing ring?
But when I left that particular gym that I wanted, because I wanted to actually compete. That was my dream, to compete in kickboxing and jiu-jitsu. And once again, my coach wouldn't let me do that.
Mm,
So I'm like, basically it just feels like my dreams are getting wasted. So I ended up leaving that gym and went to another one in Richmond, um, where you were kind of forced to fight. I shouldn't say kind of, you were forced to fight. So if you're trained, you're like, well, you're going to fight now. I really didn't want to fight because it was never my choice. I wanted my choice to go, I want to compete. I want to do this. I was just forced to fight because that's how you prove yourself as a man. That's how you get the girls' attentions. That's how you get the gym's respect. So I didn't like the idea of fighting for everyone else's choices, but I still did anyway. And to jump in and compete, I was training a lot. So I was training 6 days a week, a few hours a day, to get ready for my first fight. And it is daunting, because you get all these different people just constantly beating you up in the ring, and instead of teaching you, they're just going, come on, man, be a man, get hit. There wasn't any technique to it. It was just get hit and keep
mm,
fighting back. So that, again, that mentality of masculine toxicity is exactly the way to go about it. But I still kept doing it. And one day after class, I ended up tearing my ACL just kicking. So I stayed back to do some kicks, and I tore my ACL completely. And because I didn't want anyone to see my pain, I just hopped over to the other side of the ring, and I just stayed there for about half hour. And then eventually, when I spoke up, everyone's like, "Nah, nah, you're fine." Because when you tear your ACL, it can be quite horrific in
mm.
terms of the pain. It depends on how it is, but the pain was so excruciating. I was internally in tears, but externally like, "Nah, you're a man." So my trainer at the time didn't approve of my injury. He said I was faking it. So I still kept training for 3 months with a full blown ACL. And eventually, someone just pulled me aside and said, "Mate, you've got to stop listening to him because you're going to destroy your body." And that's
Mm,
how I got out of. Well, I couldn't train. I literally couldn't train. I shouldn't have been training. But when you've got people around you who think you're lying and you've got to constantly prove yourself. Again, I didn't have support to understand what was right, what was wrong, what's an athlete, what's a fighter. Because when you look at the term fighter, people's mentality is we fight for everything. But I don't like the term fighter, because that can be an abrupt, well, we're fighters. But the mentality of a fighter is go, 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 go. you fight till the death of you. The mentality of an athlete is smart. It's a chess match. What am I going to do? How am I going to utilize my strengths? So I don't think fighting is for me, because I'm not in there to get my head bashed in and then get a reward of good on you, mate. You're a man now.
Mm.
That's not how the game should be. So I stopped using the term fighter and put in term, athlete, sports, art, craft, because that is what it is. And depending on who trains you and your coaches, you'll know if you're in the right gym. And don't get me wrong, I love watching boxing. I love watching people getting knocked out. It is fun. But in hindsight, as a coach, it's not good for the head. It depends on how you approach the sport. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword on how you perceive it.
And of that, your experiences with being involved in sport, and recently we've had a lot of controversy about trans sports people and their present our I should say our representation in competitive sports or any sports. Can you give us a bit of your insight into this, Pharrell? Like, why
Yeah.
do people have a problem with having trans people compete in sports?
Well, it depends on who you speak to. The majority seem to, from my understanding of what I've heard and seen, is the majority seem to think it's all about unfair advantage, that they're cheating. And no one seems to put it down to the reality of it. It's more like, well, you're cheating. You're a man now. You're a woman, or you've got testosterone, or you've got this big advantage. You're not a man, so why should you compete in the man sport? And it becomes very political. And it's basically my first impression is you're just being an absolute idiot about it. Like, you're not really giving anyone a reason other than that's your opinion and you hate it. But the reality is, yes, if you're a man and you transition into a woman, you're going to have different biological changes now. Your muscular system is going to change. You can't change your skeletal system. Now, the only way I can say this is if I'm born a biological man and I'm 30 years old and I transition into a female at 30 years old and I've been training for 10 years in boxing, my advantage is going to be I've already built up my muscles as a man training in the craft. And now I've transitioned over. So if my muscles were, yay big and I've trained boxing with that yay big muscle, of course, when I transition, I've got that muscle memory. I've still got that agility and speed from my understanding and knowledge. And so that puts you at an advantage because you've been training a lot longer and now you've transitioned. It's not an advantage in terms of I'm cheating. It's, yes, you have that advantage because you've been training in that sport a lot longer. But that's like me training as a boxer for 10 years versus, someone who's been training for 2 years. I have 8 years advantage over that person. Unfortunately, a lot of the males who have transitioned into females are transitioning a lot later in life, with a lot of their sports behind them. As you know, they've already trained in that sport for quite a long time. And I don't know if they've used steroids. I don't know if they've used any enhancing drugs that have allowed them to get, muscular growth. So when they've transitioned over and they are in a new sport where women's sport is still new and upcoming and they haven't trained that long, the skill set behind them is a lot greater. So that was the only thing I would say if there is an advantage. But when I use the term advantage, I don't like to look at it as cheating, because there's, poor people out there who may have felt they could only transition now. That's giving, I can finally transition, can't even be themselves anymore because they're looked upon like you've done that to transition because you failed as a man and now you want to win as a woman. And, these poor people who unfortunately maybe just for whatever reason transition later now have that stigma on them. Because transgenders are coming out a lot in sports, everyone puts you're cheating, you've got an advantage, you failed at this, so you win at that. But let alone if you can just put women aside in sport, the unfair advantage of women themselves, they don't get the credit for their training, they don't get enough training in the areas that they should. People look at women like, oh, they're just women, what would they be able to do in the sport? A lot more than men, but no one gives them the opportunity to thrive. Like boxing, women get 6 rounds, some get smaller rounds than men. And I'm like, well, why do women get shorter rounds? And everyone's like, oh, because women don't have the lung capacity and, they're women. But you're not training them up either to have their capacity built for 10 rounds. You're just putting them down because they're a woman. So already you're treating women like they're not equal as a man. And that already alone makes me upset to hear, because women are a lot smarter than men, in my opinion. And they have a lot more to bring to the table because they're genuinely in these sports, besides boxing, could be anything, because they're there for a pure reason of personal development and athleticism. But yet you keep putting them down because they're not good enough to be a man. But we're not here to be better than anyone. You know what I mean? You can't say that a man is better than a woman and a woman is better than a man, because we'll forever be competing with everyone. There's always going to be a man who's stronger than me, faster than me, but then there's someone who's going to be stronger and faster than him. So if we stopped looking at genders for one time in our lives and just went, we are individuals. Yes, you're right. We've got the female category. You've got the, the paraplegics have their category, and just look at it like that. And I understand, again, you put in a gender because that's just how the sports is, and stop putting everyone down. Then there are ways around it. There's a lot of ways that we can get transgenders to participate if there's a system set up in place. But all of our judgment is coming from people who already have their set mindset of hatred, or have a cultural belief of man is man, woman is woman. And I don't mean culture as in, like a certain country, as in their cultural beliefs is, this is man, this is woman. You get people in the sports who are very, this is this and this is that. It's like, Collingwood and Melbourne, you're either Collingwood or you're Melbourne. They're very stuck in their ways. And we're getting our opinions from people who already have such hatred and negativity towards us. And we're getting scientific proven facts from people who are not sharing it, and people who are from backgrounds where it's very science-based and biological-based man-woman. So we're not even being included in sports to understand, well, I'm transgender, I'm in boxing. Why aren't I participating in the research? Why aren't you using me as research? You're using a man and a woman and going, oh, that's man, that's woman. But yet you have no qualifications to justify what transgender is, or the process, or the transitioning process, or what hormone comparison we're looking at. And I've yet to see any proof. I know they said it at Finna with the swimmer, one of the ladies from, I think it was Australia, goes, oh, I saw the proof. Well, sweetheart, we didn't see the proof. You're not transgender and you're not a qualified PhD doctor, yet are you a qualified coach? So who are you to make that judgment upon our behalf and say it is what it is? And yet people who follow her view are going to go, yep, she's right. But we're just taking everyone's opinion. We're not taking professionals. We're not taking someone like myself or yourself, or someone who's actually transgender, who can explain it back to the community and say, look, this is the research, because it's still new. So who are you to make the comment on something that's still developing? Like inclusion officers, everyone goes on about we need to be qualified inclusion officers, but it's just a new area. There is nothing qualified and set in stone as of yet. It's so new. So who are you to make judgment on what trans is, what hormone therapy is, what the stigma is? It's too abrupt at the moment, and everyone's speaking on opinion based and nothing from actual research that's proven, in my eyes. And that's coming from someone who's a transgender coach. And I'm still like, I haven't seen anything yet.
Mm. Well, thank you for that, clarifying that for us, Pharrell. As time is escaping us, I just want to finally ask you, the last few minutes, if you could give some advice to parents who are listening to this for their kids who identify as transgender, what would the key message be if they want to participate in sport?
To support them and allow them to, or at least to assist and support. I know for the parents it can be challenging, because if a group may not allow them to participate, it becomes a very challenging situation. But my advice to parents is just to show that support for your child as if it was yourself. I mean, sports is such a big thing in society, and sports itself is health and wellness. It brings such a positive place in our lives. If we take away something for our child's mentality and health and well-being, where does it leave us? So I understand there are some organizations who won't allow it, but my advice to parents is to keep fighting, and to find support groups or anyone like myself or yourself who can keep paving that way for a new era and for society to change. But the biggest one is support, and do what you can to support their well-being, because it's their health and wellness that we're looking out for, which is number one.
Pharrell Sharma, it's been an absolute pleasure in speaking with you today. And for anyone listening, we'll include Pharrell's contact details. So if you'd like to contact Pharrell for any consultancy work or speak at your schools, you'll be able to reach him via his social medias, and also look him out on his Instagram account, which I love watching because he does give you great tips on keeping fit and being looking after your bodies. And it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for spending some time with us on our Voices series, Pharrell Sharma.
Thanks for having me, Ricky.